The annals of human history bear witness to countless conflicts, moments of profound despair, and acts of unimaginable cruelty. Yet, few events in recorded memory provoke such deep introspection and horrified disbelief as the systematic extermination of an entire people. This chilling question echoes through the decades. What drove a single individual, Adolf Hitler, to orchestrate the annihilation of an entire ethnic group, the Jewish people, on an industrial scale? The sheer audacity and methodical nature of such a decision defy conventional understanding, leaving an indelible scar on the collective conscience of humanity. It compels one to confront the darkest corners of human potential. One is compelled to ask, what virulent strain of hatred, what twisted philosophy could possibly rationalize the construction of gas chambers, the deployment of death trains, transporting innocent souls to their demise and the extinguishing of millions of precious lives? This was not merely the outcome of impulsive rage, but the calculated execution of a deeply ingrained ideology, manifesting in an unprecedented campaign of terror and destruction. The mechanisms of this horror, from the chilling efficiency of the gas chambers, designed for mass murder, to the relentless journeys on overcrowded trains, sealing the fate of countless victims, represent a nadir in moral civilization. These were not abstract figures, but individual lives, each a universe of hopes, dreams, and relationships, all brutally extinguished. Indeed, this narrative is far from easy to confront. It demands courage, a willingness to gaze into the abyss of human depravity. Yet, it remains a story that absolutely must be told, transmitted across generations, not only as a stark warning, but as a solemn testament to the victims. To shy away from its painful truths would be to betray the memory of those who perished, and to ignore the profound lessons it offers for the future of humanity. This historical account serves as a critical mirror, reflecting the potential for barbarity when unchecked hatred is allowed to flourish. Today, a profound and disturbing journey commences, delving into one of the most abyssal chapters in the annals of modern history: the consuming, relentless obsession of Adolf Hitler with the total destruction of the Jewish people. This was not a passing whim, but the central pillar of his worldview, a pathological fixation that would ultimately consume an entire continent in flames and redraw the moral boundaries of what was thought possible in terms of human cruelty. We will explore the genesis and evolution of this terrifying obsession, tracing its trajectory from whispered resentments to state-sponsored genocide. The fundamental questions persist. From where did this profound hatred originate? How did such venomous prejudice spread with such alarming speed, infecting the minds of millions? And why did so many individuals, seemingly ordinary people, choose to follow such a monstrous path, becoming complicit in unspeakable atrocities? These inquiries delve into the very fabric of human psychology and societal dynamics, seeking to understand the mechanisms that allowed such widespread complicity. This unfolding narrative is one that is guaranteed to send shivers down the spine. What limits, if any, constrain the hatred of a single individual? Can a deeply pathological, diseased idea metastasize into state policy, dragging an entire continent into the gaping maw of an abyss? This is not merely the chronicle of a dictator's rise and fall. It is a harrowing account of how contempt, widespread ignorance, and chilling indifference can morph into weapons far more lethal and devastating than any conventional army. During the cataclysmic years of the Second World War, the world bore witness to absolute horror. Millions of human beings were systematically persecuted, unjustly imprisoned, subjected to unimaginable torture, and ultimately murdered, solely for their identity. Jews, Roma, communists, individuals with disabilities, homosexuals, all were marked, all were meticulously targeted by a vast, cold, and efficient machinery explicitly designed to destroy them without mercy or remorse. But among all the unspeakable atrocities, a singular question continues to reverberate, sending tremors through the collective consciousness. Why did Hitler harbor such an intense, unyielding hatred for the Jewish people? This is not a question with a facile or straightforward answer. It transcends the simplistic explanation of a mere personal whim or an isolated obsession. The virulent antisemitism that came to define the Nazi regime possessed roots that delved far deeper into the historical and cultural soil of Europe. To truly comprehend the scale and brutality of the genocide, one must first endeavor to understand the complex character of the man behind the horrific plan, and the specific societal context that nurtured and amplified his destructive ideology. Adolf Hitler, in a profound irony, was not born with this ingrained hatred. His formative years, though undoubtedly challenging and marked by personal difficulties, did not exhibit any overt animosity towards Jewish individuals. He was, for all intents and purposes, an ordinary child, possessing the universal dreams, frustrations, and familial conflicts common to youth. However, something fundamental shifted within him. A dark, insidious growth began to germinate in his inner world, particularly as the wider world, through a series of perceived injustices and failures, repeatedly closed its doors in his face. This was not a singular instance, but a relentless succession of rejections. Each perceived slight, every personal failure, every deeply felt humiliation accumulated within him, like glowing embers beneath the surface of his skin, slowly building an internal inferno of resentment and bitterness. When Hitler finally encountered an ideology that appeared to provide a coherent framework for his mounting frustrations, offering simplistic answers and scapegoats for his personal and national woes, it was already too late. The hatred had solidified, becoming his unwavering compass, guiding his every thought and action. What commenced as fiery, inflammatory speeches delivered in crowded, smoke-filled beer halls would tragically culminate in the construction of industrial-scale gas chambers in desolate camps such as Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor. These were places where the very essence of humanity touched its absolute nadir, where the concept of human dignity was systematically dismantled and annihilated. But to fully grasp how such an unfathomable point was reached, one must journey backward in time, long before the thundering speeches, long before the outbreak of war, long before the Führer assumed his tyrannical mantle. One must return to the very origins, to a period when everything was merely a contained resentment, simmering silently within the heart of a young, frustrated man. And so, our story truly begins here. For before the unspeakable horror of the Holocaust, there existed a deeply frustrated dream. There was a city teeming with latent prejudices, a devastating war that ended in crushing defeat, and ultimately, an entire people who would pay the ultimate, unimaginable price. Before the hate, there was a dream, and it was, surprisingly, an utterly innocuous aspiration, the simple desire to paint, to create, to become an artist. Adolf Hitler, in his formative years, harbored no thoughts of concentration camps or global wars. His mind was preoccupied with canvases, with paintbrushes, with the prospect of art exhibitions. His grandest ambition was to gain admission to the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. However, the imperial city of Vienna, with its own complex currents and artistic standards, harbored different plans for him. At the tender age of 18, Hitler departed his modest hometown in Austria, venturing to the imperial capital with a suitcase brimming with youthful hopes and a collection of his drawings. Yet the Academy, in its objective assessment, failed to perceive in him the artistic genius he so fervently believed himself to possess. He was rejected, not once, but then again. The venerable faculty informed him that his paintings lacked the necessary talent for academic art, finding him unsuitable for their rigorous program. And with that, unknowingly, they cast into the world the very first, almost imperceptible spark of his festering resentment. Humiliated, adrift, and devoid of direction, Hitler began to wander the labyrinthine streets of Vienna. He subsisted in shelters for the indigent, selling hand-painted postcards to eke out a meager living. He often slept on park benches and sought refuge in public libraries, immersing himself in books. It was a profoundly dark, solitary, and largely silent period of his life. Yet he was not entirely alone in his thoughts. Dangerous ideas began to infiltrate his mind, finding fertile ground in his desperation. He encountered these concepts in newspapers, in incendiary pamphlets, and in the casual conversations overheard in cafes. Nationalism, virulent racism, elaborate conspiracy theories, all these toxic elements were omnipresent, subtly permeating the very air of an imperial city that was visibly trembling under the immense weight of its own diversity. Vienna, in that era, was a vibrant but volatile cultural melting pot. Jews, Slavs, Hungarians, Germans, Czechs, all shared the same urban space, coexisting amidst palpable tensions and deeply ingrained prejudices. The Jewish community, in particular, was numerous, prominent, and highly active, boasting significant presence in the arts, sciences, and finance. For the more conservative sectors of Viennese society, this visibility was viewed with deep suspicion, thinly veiled resentment, and outright hatred. And there stood Hitler, an impressionable young man, absorbing it all. It was not an immediate, sudden transformation, but gradually his profound personal frustration began to find convenient culprits. These scapegoats were given a face, a name, and a religion. They were individuals who, in reality, had absolutely nothing to do with his artistic failures, yet they conveniently became the perfect, simplistic explanation for all his woes. For him, hating became infinitely easier than confronting the painful truth that he simply was not talented enough. A pivotal figure who profoundly influenced this formative period was Karl Lueger, the charismatic and politically astute mayor of Vienna. Lueger was immensely popular and openly anti-Semitic, skillfully employing hatred as a political strategy to rally support and win elections. And it worked with alarming effectiveness. Hitler took meticulous note of this. He observed how words, when wielded with cunning and malice, possessed the power to move masses, and how those masses, once swayed, could either construct empires or utterly destroy civilizations. Thus, amidst his failed drawings and the venomous rhetoric of political hatred, the young aspiring dreamer began to vanish. In his place, something else, something far harder and infinitely darker, started to emerge. For when the pursuit of art dies, fanaticism, tragically, often takes its place, and the world had not yet even reached the brink of war. The Vienna of the early 20th century was no ordinary city. It was the pulsating heart of a vast empire, the undisputed cultural epicenter of Central Europe, and simultaneously a seething cauldron of political and social tensions. Nationalists, imperialists, liberals, anti-Semites, socialists, conservatives, all shared the same urban landscape, yet they harbored vastly different, often conflicting visions of the world's future. And amidst this cacophony of ideologies, a young, failed artist began to listen with rapt attention. Adolf Hitler found himself lurking in the shadows of this resplendent city, bereft of money, lacking prestige, and without a clear future. But he possessed an abundance of time, and that time he meticulously invested in observing, reading, and meticulously nurturing a new identity within himself. Not the identity of an artist, but that of a man who was beginning to perceive enemies lurking everywhere. In the smoky Viennese cafes, where once conversations revolved around art and literature, discussions now increasingly veered towards theories of superior races and grand global conspiracies. Local publishing houses were overflowing with inflammatory pamphlets that unjustly accused Jews of dominating banking, controlling the press, and manipulating commerce. Racist ideas were not merely tolerated, they were openly applauded and widely disseminated. Vienna, in this period, proved to be an exceptionally fertile ground for the insidious seeds of ideological poison. Politicians brazenly utilized antisemitism as a potent weapon in their electoral campaigns. The press normalized it through constant repetition, and a significant portion of the citizenry accepted it as common sense, unthinkingly internalizing its hateful tenets. For a disoriented and resentful young man like Hitler, this pervasive environment was not only deeply seductive but also profoundly revelatory. He discovered within it a compelling narrative that provided a convenient explanation for his personal failures. It was no longer his lack of talent that was to blame, it was them. A narrative that was deceptively simple, demonstrably false, yet terrifyingly effective. The speeches delivered by Mayor Karl Lueger, a master populist who shamelessly wielded hatred as an electoral tool, became a foundational model for Hitler. Despite Lueger himself maintaining personal friendships with Jewish individuals, his political strategy of blaming a minority group for society's ills consistently generated thunderous applause, secured numerous votes, and cemented his hold on power. Hitler also delved into the writings of authors such as Lanz von Liebenfels, who propagated theories of racial purity as if they were established scientific fact. Pseudo-scientific journals brazenly misinterpreted Darwinism with esoteric theories, creating a dangerous pseudo-intellectual foundation for racial prejudice. There was widespread talk of an Aryan race destined to rule, and of inferior races that threatened to contaminate its purity. Thus, something far more profound than a mere ideology began to take shape. It was an entire world view, a twisted lens through which Hitler perceived himself as the future redeemer of Germany, the one who would restore order and purity to a perceived degenerate nation. And within this meticulously constructed mental schema, Jews were unequivocally designated as the absolute, primary, and eternal enemy, not merely one among many, but the ultimate antagonist. Vienna did not transform him into a murderer, but it undeniably educated him. It provided him with the vocabulary for his burgeoning rage, demonstrating that organized hatred could be a powerful tool for mass mobilization. It showed him that the most dangerous ideas are not born on battlefields, but germinate in libraries, echo in cafes, and fester in public discourses that too few dare to question. What Hitler absorbed on those very streets did not remain confined to his mind. He carried it with him, meticulously refined it, and then unleashed its full destructive force upon an unsuspecting world. On June 28, 1914, a single bullet fired in Sarajevo ignited the fuse that would cause Europe to explode into an inferno of war. The First World War was on the precipice of beginning, and a young Adolf Hitler, still without money, without a career, and utterly without direction, perceived in this impending global conflict a profound personal opportunity. Finally, he could serve a cause far greater than himself. Finally, he could truly belong. He enthusiastically enlisted as a volunteer in the German army, notably choosing not the Austrian army, because despite his Austrian birth, his heart already beat with an almost religious fervor for Germany. He was assigned to the extremely perilous role of a messenger on the Western Front. Although he was not a natural leader among his comrades, he performed his duties with unwavering discipline and a curious detachment. He was wounded, decorated for bravery, and profoundly marked by the experience, both physically and psychologically, for the rest of his life. However, it was not the literal gunpowder and shrapnel that inflicted the deepest, most enduring scar upon his psyche. It was the ultimate outcome of the war. When Germany signed the armistice in 1918, Hitler found himself utterly unable to comprehend the defeat. From his perspective on the front lines, the soldiers were still resisting, still fighting valiantly. It did not appear to be a military defeat in the traditional sense. Therefore, he concluded, it must have been something else entirely, a profound betrayal from within. Thus was born one of the most insidious and dangerous myths of the 20th century, the stab in the back legend. This was a virulent conspiracy theory that falsely asserted Germany had not been vanquished by its external enemies on the battlefields, but rather by internal enemies, specifically Jews, communists, and other alleged traitors operating within the very fabric of the nation. It was an idea completely devoid of empirical evidence, yet it resonated with terrifying force in a nation that felt deeply humiliated and utterly desperate. The defeat was not merely military. It was a profound psychological trauma. The Treaty of Versailles, formally signed in 1919, imposed brutal and punitive conditions upon Germany. These included the loss of significant territories, the burden of enormous economic reparations, a drastic reduction of its military forces, and a crushing sense of public humiliation. For Hitler, these terms were utterly intolerable. He could not accept that his beloved country, the nation he adored with an almost religious zeal, was being treated as a pariah state. And then, just as he had learned during his formative years in Vienna, he began to search for culprits. And, once again, he found them. The Jews, according to his twisted worldview, were responsible for the perceived moral decay, the economic bankruptcy, and the social disunity plaguing Germany. This narrative provided a perfect, simplistic explanation for a country desperately seeking easy answers and scapegoats. The frustrated young man who had once harbored dreams of painting serene landscapes now began to paint enemies, but this time not on canvas. Instead, he painted them vividly onto the malleable minds of an entire nation. The trauma of defeat did not create Hitler, but it undeniably provided him with his overarching cause. And his cause, in its malevolent simplicity, demanded a clear, identifiable enemy, one that could effectively concentrate all the hatred, all the rage, and all the profound frustration of a devastated populace. And for Hitler, that enemy possessed a name, a face, and a religion. While Germany struggled valiantly to rise from its ruins, a new, insidious threat germinated deep within its interior. This was not an invading army, it was a dangerous idea. And that idea already had a distinct face, a compelling voice, and a meticulously crafted plan. Germany, in the 1920s, was a nation utterly devastated, its infrastructure in ruins, its people stripped of pride, and adrift without clear direction. Hyperinflation rendered banknotes virtually worthless pieces of paper. Families resorted to burning German marks simply to keep warm during the brutal winters. Breadlines stretched longer than any lingering hopes for a better future. Amidst this profound chaos and despair, the message of a singular man began to resonate with increasing power. His name was Adolf Hitler, and his speeches contained precisely what a desperate populace yearned to hear: external blame for their woes, grandiose promises of national greatness, and, crucially, a clearly identifiable enemy to target their collective anger. In 1919, he joined a small, obscure group of ultranationalists known as the German Workers' Party. At the time, no one knew him, and virtually no one took him seriously. However, his innate capacity for public speaking was something altogether different. At every rally, his voice, charged with raw emotion, ignited the dormant passions of the attendees. His rage was infectious, his body language violently theatrical, and his oratory disturbingly hypnotic. He rapidly ascended within the party's ranks, eventually changing its name and transforming it into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the infamous Nazi Party. With this new vehicle, his twisted worldview was elevated and enshrined as a political program. Hitler did not invent antisemitism, it had existed for centuries. But he meticulously refined it, institutionalized it, and skillfully converted it into a potent strategy for seizing and maintaining power. In 1925, he published Mein Kampf, My Struggle, a rambling manifesto of hatred thinly disguised as an ideological treatise. In its pages, he unequivocally declared that Germany could only be saved through authoritarian leadership, through the complete eradication of the Jewish people, and through the conquest of new territories, the notorious Lebensraum, or living space. But books alone were insufficient, spectacle was required, and Hitler understood this better than anyone else. Nazism evolved into a meticulously orchestrated visual and performative machine. Torchlit parades, colossal red banners emblazoned with striking symbols, and massive synchronized hymns. Every Nazi event was a chilling choreography of fanatical devotion. and the populace, starved for identity and purpose, responded with fervent applause. The Great Depression of 1929 delivered the final crushing blow to an already fragile Germany. Millions were rendered jobless. Businesses collapsed en masse, and banks buckled under the weight of economic ruin. The Weimar Republic, Germany's nascent democracy, was in its death throes, and Hitler, seizing the moment, promised to resurrect it. He promised order, he promised employment, and he vowed to restore German pride. But in exchange, he demanded something absolute: blind obedience and a new, unifying common enemy. In January 1933, he was appointed Chancellor. That very same year, the Reichstag building, the German parliament, was set ablaze, an act for which he swiftly blamed the communists. Subsequently, he systematically eliminated civil liberties, outlawed opposing political parties, and relentlessly persecuted all dissidents. By 1934, he had unilaterally declared himself Führer, or leader. The state itself became a direct reflection of his will, his ideology, and in that terrifying reflection, there was absolutely no place left for the Jewish people. The ascent of Nazism was not a random accident. It was a slow, systematic, and meticulously designed process, engineered to transform deep-seated hatred into absolute power. And it succeeded with devastating efficacy. Hitler did not merely conquer Germany geographically, he conquered its fears, its frustrations, and ultimately, its very soul. And the worst, horrifyingly, had yet to begin. When Hitler finally seized power, the pervasive hatred ceased to be mere rhetoric. It was swiftly codified into law. And behind that law, a precise, meticulous, and industrial-scale machinery of destruction was constructed. This was a vast, bureaucratic structure conceived not merely to isolate the Jewish people, but to systematically eliminate them, operating with cold efficiency, devoid of emotion, and without pause. Everything commenced with subtle signals, with prohibitions that were initially small, seemingly innocuous. Jews were barred from holding public office, then forbidden from marrying Germans. Subsequently, they were prohibited from entering certain businesses, using public parks, owning radios, and generally existing with any semblance of normalcy in society. Propaganda relentlessly depicted them as vermin, parasites, and existential threats to the purity of the German people. This systematic dehumanization was the crucial first step, and it proved tragically successful. But the subsequent step was even more chilling: physical exclusion and segregation. Jews were forcibly compelled to wear the yellow Star of David on their clothing. Their businesses were systematically looted, their homes confiscated, and they were forcibly concentrated into overcrowded ghettos, walled-off districts, densely packed, starved of food and medicine. Life within these confines was a relentless cycle of pure misery, and that misery, in its horrifying essence, was an integral part of the overarching plan. In 1939, with the eruption of the Second World War, the situation for Jews dramatically worsened. With the swift invasion of Poland, Hitler gained access to millions more Jewish individuals. And then came the final solution, a chillingly bureaucratic euphemism designed to mask the unspeakable, the total extermination, the genocide of an entire people. From 1942 onwards, 6 specialized extermination camps were constructed in occupied Poland: Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chelmno, and Majdanek. These were not merely forced labor camps, they were literal factories of death. Their design left no room for error, following a horrifyingly efficient process: train arrival, selection, gas chamber, crematorium, repeat. In Auschwitz, the most infamous of all, the process was absolutely horrifying in its cold efficiency. Upon arrival, prisoners were brutally separated into fit and unfit categories. The elderly, the very young children, and pregnant women were immediately directed to the gas chambers. The others were condemned to grueling forced labor until they collapsed from exhaustion and starvation. The chilling motto above the entrance gate read, "Arbeit macht frei," work sets you free. But it was a cruel, cynical lie. The work itself was a slow, agonizing death sentence, comprising 14-hour days under extreme cold, with pervasive hunger, constant beatings, and relentless surveillance. When prisoners were no longer deemed useful, they were summarily discarded, sent to their ultimate demise. The Nazis made desperate attempts to conceal their crimes. They burned incriminating documents, demolished camp facilities, and tried to erase all traces of their atrocities. But they could not obliterate the testimonies of the few who survived, nor the mountains of bodies, nor the lingering scars, nor the profound horror etched into the eyes of those who miraculously endured. The machinery of extermination was not an impulsive act of madness. It was a meticulously planned system designed by bureaucrats, engineers, doctors, and civil servants. It stands as the most terrifying testament to how far civilization can descend when ethical principles completely vanish. And that machinery did not cease its operations until much of Europe lay covered in the ashes of millions. The war concluded. The weapons fell silent. Cities across Europe began the arduous process of reconstruction. But for millions of people, the true horror was only just beginning. For the collapse of the Third Reich did not bring immediate relief. Instead, it ushered in a new, profound form of suffering, the trauma of the survivor. The concentration and extermination camps were liberated by the Allied forces. What they discovered within those gates surpassed all human imagination. Piles of emaciated corpses, ovens still warm from their ghastly work, skeletal prisoners barely able to speak or move, men, women, and children reduced to mere shadows of their former selves. Yet, even after liberation, there was often no place to return. Many Jewish communities had been utterly annihilated, their homes destroyed, their families wiped out. Hundreds of thousands of Jewish survivors found themselves in displaced persons camps, a brutal irony after the captivity they had endured under the Nazis, waiting in improvised barracks. Without a homeland, without certainty, the Western countries offered few viable options. Borders remained largely closed, and immigration policies were restrictive. Most survivors sought one thing above all else: a home. And for many, that longed-for home was called Palestine. However, the path was far from simple. The region was then under British control, and restrictions on Jewish immigration were stringent. Tensions with the local Arab population were already escalating. Nevertheless, clandestine networks began to operate, courageously transporting Jews towards the Promised Land. In 1948, with the establishment of the State of Israel, a portion of this vast diaspora finally found a place to begin anew. Not without conflict, not without bloodshed, but with the fervent hope of never again being persecuted simply for existing. The Holocaust also inflicted invisible wounds, deep scars on language, culture, and identity. Before the war, Yiddish was a vibrant language spoken by over 11 million people, rich with humor, wisdom, and centuries of history. After the Holocaust, its resonant echo was tragically silenced, along with millions of its speakers. In the religious sphere, the tragedy was nothing short of an earthquake. How could one continue to believe in a just God after Auschwitz? A new theology emerged, one of silence, of profound mourning, of spiritual rebellion. Some interpreted the events as divine punishment, others as the ultimate proof of divine abandonment. But no one, believer or non-believer, emerged unscathed. Literature and art, too, grappled with finding answers. Testimonies from figures like Elie Wiesel, Primo Levi, and Viktor Frankl attempted to articulate in words what seemed impossible to narrate. Films such as Schindler's List, The Pianist, and Life is Beautiful endeavored to salvage some semblance of humanity amidst the hellish inferno. But even so, many pondered, how can the unrepresentable ever truly be represented? Years later, museums, memorials, and institutions arose across the globe. Memory itself became a political, educational, and ethical imperative. Not to revive the pain for its own sake, but to prevent its recurrence. Because the Holocaust did not end in 1945. It continues to resonate every time hatred finds a new disguise, every time intolerance raises its voice once more. And for this reason, remembering is not an option. It is an undeniable duty. Never again. Two words that reverberate through museums, memorial sites, and countless speeches. Two words that have transformed into a mantra, a solemn promise, a stark warning. But is merely repeating them enough? The Holocaust was far more than a heinous crime. It was a moral abyss, an irreparable fracture in the very history of humanity. And it did not occur in secrecy. It unfolded in plain sight, witnessed by many. It was executed through official decrees, through explicit laws, through public speeches, and with the chilling efficiency of factories, trains, and perfectly organized functionaries. It was not solely the madness of a single dictator. It was the complicity of thousands. It was the chilling indifference of millions. After the war, the Nuremberg trials attempted to deliver justice. Some prominent Nazi leaders were tried. The horrific crimes were meticulously documented, and crucial legal precedents were established. However, these proceedings could not restore the victims, nor could they heal the shattered souls of the survivors. And critically, they did not prevent new genocides from recurring in other corners of the planet, under different names, with other flags, but tragically, with the very same logic of hatred. For hatred does not simply die. It transforms. It changes its form. Sometimes it masquerades as ideology, at other times as religion, as political expediency, or as fervent patriotism. And it invariably finds excuses, always finding new victims. This is why remembering is not merely about recounting what happened. It is about understanding how it happened, and, crucially, why. It compels us to ask how a cultured, modern, civilized society could become so utterly blind to such profound horror. It demands that we recognize the warning signs, the contempt for those who are different, the pervasive spread of disinformation, the insidious grip of fanaticism, and the dangerous normalization of hatred. Every time we forget, we inadvertently open the door for history to repeat itself, perhaps with different protagonists, with different victims, but always with the same suffocating darkness. Therefore, the Holocaust is not merely a chapter from the past. It is a mirror, one that obliges us to look deeply at ourselves and to make a conscious decision, whether we choose to be part of the silence or part of the enduring memory. Never again must not be a mere phrase. It must be an unwavering commitment. When Soviet forces took control of the area, they purportedly recovered 2 severely mutilated bodies, which were then secretly buried along with the remains of Goebbels and his family. The Soviets maintained this narrative, but never produced photographs or conclusive evidence. In 1946, the location of these remains was allegedly changed, and in 1970, according to the Soviet version, the bones were completely pulverized, reduced to ashes like in a crematorium, and then scattered. The Western Allies, including the United States and Britain, suspected that the Soviet account was untrue, believing the bodies had not been found. However, the Soviets could not admit the possibility that Adolf Hitler might have escaped. J. Edgar Hoover, the formidable head of the FBI, launched an ongoing investigation into this matter. American military intelligence in 1945 firmly believed that Hitler was still alive and had escaped. 2 primary theories emerged, one suggesting he fled to South America, and the other postulating an escape to Africa, specifically South Africa, or an intermediate region with established German communities. Both South Africa and Argentina harbored significant German populations who had been ardent supporters of Adolf Hitler. However, the Eichhorns at the Eden Hotel had maintained an extraordinarily close relationship with Hitler, even financing his early political campaign. The money they sent to him allegedly purchased the Mercedes-Benz he drove everywhere and the small airplane he used for campaigning across Germany. They continued to provide financial support, to the extent that J. Edgar Hoover's report concluded that if Hitler had indeed escaped, he would have sought refuge in Argentina with Ada and Walter, with whom he had corresponded extensively. Letters dating from 1920-22 up to the 1940s exist, before the correspondence abruptly ceased and was never resumed. Therefore, the FBI's investigation strongly centered on the possibility that Adolf Hitler had been hidden at the Eden Hotel. However, there are chronological discrepancies. The Eden Hotel was confiscated by the Argentine government in March 1945, while Hitler's theoretical death occurred in April. Or did it? This is the crux of the debate. In August 1945, nearly 3 months after Hitler's supposed death and the war's conclusion, a German U-boat, U-977, arrived in Mar del Plata, Argentina, at the mouth of the Rio de la Plata. Curiously, it carried a remarkably small crew. According to the captain, a young man of 25, 18 crew members had been allowed to depart, 16 to return to Germany to find their families, and 2 to escape to Spain. With this significantly reduced crew, from an original 45, 18 had left. The submarine reportedly navigated the Atlantic for 3 months to reach Argentina, where it surrendered. There was a clear problem with the timeline. A U-boat could have covered that distance in far less time. Several details simply did not align. Many conspiracy theorists assert that U-977 had indeed picked up Hitler, transported him to Argentina, navigated the Rio de la Plata, and then the Paraná River until it was close to Córdoba. The Paraná, with its depths reaching 140 meters, was perfectly navigable for a submarine. Hitler and Eva Braun were then supposedly disembarked in certain areas, going into hiding in La Falda before fleeing to another region, ultimately reaching the Hotel Vienna, located elsewhere. All of this allegedly occurred within a clandestine network that, in reality, provided substantial support for the evacuation of various Nazi leaders. Figures like Eichmann and Mengele famously found refuge in Argentina. This theory therefore implicates the owners of the Eden Hotel as being deeply involved in these operations. Coincidentally, when Juan Perón assumed the presidency, he returned the hotel to the Eichhorns, and was known to be close to them and the German community. Ultimately, concrete assurances regarding these claims are elusive. Theories both supporting and refuting Hitler's escape persist. In 2018, a team of forensic pathologists claimed that the remains found in the bunker were indeed Hitler's, citing dental records recovered by the Soviets that reportedly corresponded precisely with Adolf Hitler's known dental history. It is crucial to note that no DNA testing was conducted. The identification was based solely on dental examination. Interestingly, Hitler was a vegetarian, and his teeth reportedly showed no signs of meat consumption, a detail that seemingly aligned with his known habits. Based on this, the pathologists concluded the remains could be his. However, the Soviets consistently maintained that they had pulverized the bones to dust and dispersed the ashes to prevent any future recovery, raising questions about the authenticity of the dental evidence. Why would they have done this? The underlying motive, according to some, was the desire of certain individuals to help Hitler and other Nazi hierarchs escape, fueled by the hope of establishing a Fourth Reich, a continuation of the Third Reich they had so fervently supported. This belief system could potentially explain their willingness to provide assistance. Returning to the present, the Eden Hotel undoubtedly holds many more untold stories. As recently as 2018, during routine maintenance work, laborers engaged in removing and repairing a ceiling panel made a startling discovery: human remains. They found a male skull, ancient, completely devoid of flesh, clean, and without a body or mandible. It was merely the upper part of the cranium. Intriguingly, it bore the letters MM painted on the forehead. Also found in the same concealed cavity were the remains of animals, including cats and other unidentified creatures. The questions immediately arose. What were these remains doing there? Who placed them? They were situated in an interceiling space, not, as some initial reports suggested, within a chimney. This means they were hidden between the ceiling joists and the floor above, concealed by a plasterboard panel below. Why would human remains be stored in such a clandestine void? This discovery perhaps bears a direct relationship to the hotel's long history of ghostly encounters. The concept of witchcraft, or rather esoteric rituals, might also be considered. It is often overlooked, but certain aspects associated with the Third Reich were deeply intertwined with occult practices and esoteric beliefs. Could this discovery be connected to such rituals? And are these places where such rites are performed imbued with a strange energy, a kind of spiritual gravity that retains individuals even after their departure? Ghosts lingering for 125 years, children forever crying. Perhaps all these phenomena are intricately linked, creating an enduring tapestry of the supernatural within the historic Eden Hotel.